Dragon's Dogma, one of the best RPGs of the last decade or so. There's a sequel out. It's doing incredibly well. The reviews are already out, but we've been playing it, Josh Brown especially. Newcomer to the IP, but it's one of my favorite RPGs from yesteryear. How are you finding it?
I'm finding it absolutely tantalizing, Scott Tilford. I have massive black bags under my eyes because I was up all night last night. I must stress it's very early days for me. I'm 20 hours in, but I don't think that's necessarily...
Early days.
Well, here's the thing. I'm 20 hours in,
yes.
but that isn't reflective of like my actual progression.
Right.
I've done about 3 main quests. I've done a couple of side quests, but I've been exploring. I've been getting to grips with the system because, truthfully, this was a game that took a lot to get to grips with. Like you said, I haven't played the original, but I heard so much about it. And jumping into this world without much context, it took a lot of getting used to. It took a lot of understanding, and I ended up accidentally breaking quests towards the beginning of the game, trying to wrangle with its more esoteric features. But after about, I'd say, 5 hours or so, when it all started coming together, when I was properly reading through the tutorials and the encyclopedia, it all clicked in a delicious, delicious way.
I feel like with Dragon's Dogma, we're going to get to some specific stuff because the game's already been loaded for its physics system. There's a lot of quirky, kind of awkward design choices in here that might take a little bit of getting used to. It reminds me a lot of early From Software before everybody got on board with the Souls formula, for example, or different design quirks that From Software might do that are now very lovable and a signature thing. It felt like Dragon's Dogma was like eaten alive back in 2012 by Skyrim. It was only a few months after Skyrim, and it just didn't stand a chance. But the people who did pick it up, like myself, found a game that was very charming and had lots of individual style and cool gameplay ideas like the pawn system, P-A-W-N, you filth, and we'll get there. But the whole pawn system of like designing NPCs, sending them into other people's saves, they work alongside other characters and then they bring you back spoils, etc. Lots of cool things in there. And then Dragon's Dogma 2 seems like it's a refinement of that original vision. But a lot of the quirkiness, a lot of the esoteric stuff, the weirdness has come alongside it, like not having a lock-on in combat, for example. However, Capcom have led with that in Monster Hunter for the longest time.
Yeah.
There are ways to sort of try and mitigate that, but ultimately you're trying to line up attacks and that can be very satisfying. But let's talk about combat, because that has a lot of, you can grab on enemies, you can climb over them like Shadow of the Colossus style.
Yes.
There's a lot of gameplay forward, physics-based ideas in this thing.
Absolutely, man. And I think early on, my issue with this game early on, and it's very much a me issue, is I was trying to play it like other RPGs. But the most refreshing thing about Dragon's Dogma 2 is that it's entirely singular in its vision, and you kind of have to unlearn other perhaps mechanics or features that you have taken for granted, and that does come to the combat, which I was just thrown into, and you don't have that lock-on system, and you're kind of getting to grips with your abilities and stuff. But once you start figuring out how to play the specific classes and you start getting more abilities, it just becomes a fantastic toolbox. Like you said, there's that Monster Hunter DNA in there where you and your party and maybe some AI helpers are trying to take down these huge beasts or these entire camps of goblins or what it may be, and interacting with the different specializations that your pawn characters have are always amazing. Like being able to toss one of your pals onto the head of an ogre so they can stab a fire arrow in it, then jump off, then you throw an arrow into that arrow and it explodes, then it drops, and then your mage comes over and does a finishing move. Those little loops and that sense of experimentation is kind of what's really gotten its grips into me, because it really rewards you for messing around with the systems and thinking outside the box. And it does help that like just the core feel of those systems is really satisfying. Like it feels nice to swing a sword in this game. It feels nice to catch a spell. To catch a spell? To cast a spell. It even feels nice, but less nice in my opinion, to be an archer, which is what I started off maining as.
I was a double dagger man.
I swapped to something else, another style that I won't spoil that you get from a quest. And yeah, that side of things and that sense of experimentation, it reminds me of Baldur's Gate in how that game was obviously turn-based, but that was also a title that rewarded you for thinking outside the box, for experimenting with your items, seeing what you can accomplish if you kind of put your brain to a task. And you can just, of course, go in there, brute force and kill everything. But there's always feels like there's 4 or 5 different ways to tackle something as simple as a boss fight. One of my favorite parts so far has been repelling a dragon from one of the very early areas, and initially I just rushed straight in. I started swinging and I was doing quite a lot of damage. I could have killed it that way. I was climbing all over its neck, and then it took off and literally just flung me into the sea. And I thought, all right, I'll have to think outside the box here.
Sometimes you can cling on.
Yeah. I was out of stamina and it just flung us off. So when I went into that fight again, I was looking at my environment, noticed something from hours previously that I thought, whoa, this could come in handy. Right. I wonder if. And the game said yes. And there have been so many times where I've said out loud, I wonder if, and the game has gone, we'll try it. See what happens. And
I might freak out a bit, but I'm up for it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it might not come out as smoothly as you want it to, but we'll get the job done together.
One of us did think of this. One of the coders did think of this along the way.
That's it, man. And that element is just it's fantastic. It's you feel so unique.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say I want to talk about the improvised scenario stuff because I feel like a lot of the clips that are already doing the round showcase this sort of intermingling of AI scripts, the likes of which I don't feel like we've seen to this degree since like Skyrim. Like you would see in Skyrim, for example, a dragon walking over to a giant and the two of them fighting with you doing something completely different. It's just in the background or whatever. And I get that the original Dragon's Dogma had bits and pieces of that, but I feel like it's to the forefront in this one. One of the clips that I've seen is a player fighting a griffin and they enter a town. The griffin goes through the doorway into the town, all animated very well, and then the whole town sort of pitches in trying to take the griffin down together. Have you had things like that, or how does the general approach to the AI scripting in the open world kind of feel?
I think there are main quests, there are side quests in this game, and I've done a few of those, a lot of those in some cases, some smaller ones early on, and those are very satisfying. But yeah, it's kind of like that emergent gameplay that leaves you with those game of the year memories, for lack of a better term. Like last night, for instance, I was using the cart system where you essentially get ferried to another part of the map to try to go to a town that I hadn't been to because I had a quest there. But along the way, we got attacked in the early morning by a bunch of enemies I'd never faced before. So I jumped off the cart, defended it, felled these great enemies, got some great loot, and then I noticed something nearby, and then suddenly I was on a completely different branch of the quest that I wasn't even intending to be on, and I was searching this area just because I had that random attack. So I got completely, distracted from where I was intending to go, and ended up over there, all because of just the coincidence of being attacked at that specific point in the road. So it's like stuff like that, and the stories that come from those experiences that I'm remembering fondly. Similarly with the dragon attack, that was something I didn't realize was going to happen. I'd been to this early game town like 10 times. I'd traveled backwards and forwards for other missions, and then one time I just happened to be walking back in and there was a dragon there. And I thought, oh buddy, am I prepared for this? I guess we'll see.
Let's figure it out.
And jumping into the kind of like those missions that seemingly pop up out of nowhere just makes the world feel so dynamic.
Well, you saying it reminds you a bit of Red Dead Redemption 2, which like back when that game was coming out, Rockstar talked about this sort of new approach to open world design and the idea that you can have some random event that spirals off into a whole something that's more meaningful on the story side, but it's harder for the player to tell whether it's main path or side path or whatever, and blurring those lines over. So regardless, you're always doing something meaningful. It seems like they've nailed that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Red Dead comparison to me even comes down to the feel of gameplay and the design of the world. Like, if you've been following this game, you'll know that there's no conventional fast travel in this title because the developers want people to explore the world, really live in it. And that makes for a slow game in certain respects. You are doing a lot of walking, you're doing a lot of backtracking, and the weight of your character, even if you're as light as possible, can sometimes feel very plodding. It's a movement and physics-based system where you're having to think about your character's momentum. If you turn, you're not going to just snap, you're going to have to shift your weight and stuff. And I like that a lot when a game accomplishes it well and it feeds into the overall impact of the story. I love just walking around the world of Red Dead Redemption 2 as Arthur Morgan, breathing it all in, pretending that I'm literally a person there, taking it step by step. And Dragon's Dogma 2, I think, definitely echoes that. Like, I feel so grounded in this fantasy world, because I'm not just fast traveling to and from
It's
everywhere.
not just a to-do list of stuff.
It's not just a to-do list of stuff. There is significant content seemingly around every corner. There's always something to see, something to get distracted by. And there's something about, I don't know if you guys think this as well, but there's something about just putting one foot in front of the other in games like this, where it reminds me of Lord of the Rings, you know?
Well, it's a Bilbo quote.
Well,
I can see where my feet take me.
There we go. I didn't even know that. That wasn't even intentional. Literally,
I butchered that quote, but he did. He does a bit of that.
Something like that.
He gets there.
I felt like I was in, obviously, you know, it helps that it's fantasy, but I was in Lord of the Rings in terms of, it felt like this was a landscape that I really had to kind of conquer and kind of explore, and that Red Dead vibe comes into play with the towns as well, which kind of feel alive and have all of these interesting characters to see, and just like an incredible amount of buildings to walk into and explore. You know how in Red Dead Redemption 2, like every shack would have something in it.
Everything felt authored.
Everything felt authored, even if it was a building that was pretty nondescript. You could go in, you could rake through the drawers and whatnot. The level of detail isn't that high in Dragon's Dogma 2 because the player space just seems that much bigger, but it is a thing of, I've never wanted to skip a house as mundane as it may be, because it might have a chest in, it might have some loot in. I'm always just wanting to explore the world and see what's in there, because the more you explore, the more you might find, say, a note written by someone that will help you on a quest further on down the line, and you'll think, oh, that note mentioned this. I wonder if in the game we'll say, well, maybe we'll see.
I've got this here for you. I feel like overall there's always that conversation on can only Rockstar do a world that is this detailed? And like you're saying, it's not a one for one, but that feeling of ambition is something that, and I don't think anyone expected Dragon's Dogma 2 to be the game that would be in the same circles as Red Dead Redemption 2 or Elden Ring, which is another game that's being mentioned in the same circles as this, and potentially a bit of Baldur's Gate in there as well. But yeah, thoroughly surprised by it. However, it does seem like it's worth mentioning, at least at this stage, because with any luck it'll get patched immediately or going forward. The game's performance is very bad.
Yeah, at least I'm playing it on PlayStation 5, and it is subpar. Like, there's so many frame drops in the game that do sadly take away from the overall enjoyment of it.
And even then, it's only aiming for 30 anyway.
Yeah, it's locked to 30 frames per second. And don't get me wrong, at times it is absolutely beautiful, but with the combat already itself being intentionally weighty and a little bit unresponsive, truth be told, the frame dips and the performance issues don't help. Sometimes it feels like my person is swinging her sword like 10 seconds after I press the button. And some of that is intentional, but other times it is definitely impacted by the frame rate. I mentioned fighting that dragon. That should have been a spectacular set piece, but the reason you're not seeing any footage of it right now from my gameplay is because at times it was dropping into what felt like the single figures when I was on its back, and it's like, that is a shame. That is a shame. That is a real shame. Thankfully, it's not ever present. It's kind of, and this is going to be a bad comparison, but it's similar to the quality mode, I think, of Jedi Survivor, where you'll go long stretches without any problems, and then suddenly you'll hit one specific part, one enemy will pop up, and it'll just start to chug for a minute or two, and then it'll kind of go back to normal. That is a huge shame. It makes me wish I was playing more on PC. People's tolerance will differ from that. I do think they need to figure out a way to optimize the game better, and yeah, that is absolutely worth mentioning. Hopefully
it gets polished out. I mean, I think that, like, the thing with this game is that it's 12 years in the making, or it's 12 years since Dragon's Dogma 1. You have to imagine that a certain team of people at Capcom really wanted to get this thing over the finish line, and they waited long enough and timed it all very well. You think about what the industry was back in 2011, 2012. Like I said, the original got overshadowed by Skyrim so much. Now Bethesda are on the back foot after Starfield in the eyes of a lot of people, and this has just come along, and it's like, it's a shame that this can't nail every single bit of it. But there's so much ambition here, and there's so much charm, purpose, and soul to it that I would imagine that they'll have some patches out in the next couple of weeks. It doesn't discount the fact that you're paying money for something that isn't optimized yet. Of course, yeah. But hopefully it'll get there. Like, as we're recording this, we're still a day out from actual launch day. Yes. And we'll see how the next few days go anyway.
I hope so, man. And can I talk to you about one more thing before we finish this video? You can tell me anything you want, mate. Just to kind of like the earlier hours of the game, and kind of how I struggle with them, and things to watch out for if you are completely new to Dragon's Dogma like I am, because this game makes some bold choices that I have come to love, but I was not prepared for going into it, because to be honest, I tried to keep away from trailers for this game. I didn't want to know too much, because I'd heard so many good things about the original from you and so many of the players, and I kind of wanted to come in fresh, and I didn't realize how many things I'd taken for granted were intentionally not in here. So obviously you start the game making your custom character, and I'm one of those people who will spend hours in a character customization screen, start the game, then immediately quit out to change my design.
Yep.
And I thought I was going to do that in here. I made my hero, and when I got into the game, she was a bit too small. I wanted her to be a bit taller relative to the other characters, so I thought, not to worry, it's right at the start of the game, I'll quit out, do it again. You can't do that, Scott Tilford, because you only have one save file in the entire game. And that is something that takes a little bit getting used to. I love it because it means you can't really go back and change things if you get it wrong. You kind of have to live with the consequences. But it does mean something as simple as creating your character at the beginning. When the game says, there's no going back, are you sure you want to lock this in? It means it. It absolutely means it. And it takes a little while, I think, at least it did for me, to get used to the save system. Because you can save while you're out in the world anywhere, and that will kind of checkpoint you. So if you die, you'll go back to that spot. But it says there's only one save file, but there's kind of two, because you can also save when you go to an inn in one of the towns, and that will, rest your character, and it will bank a save there. And that is separate from the regular autosave. So the autosave always eats itself every time you do a new one, but the saves at the inn only eat themselves when you save at an inn.
Either way, they're trying to get you to commit to certain things and live with whatever. If a dragon kills some villagers, they're going to stay dead.
But I'm just pointing it out because it does give you some leeway. Before you go out on a big quest, you can save at the inn. And you might end up having to redo X amount of minutes or maybe even hours if you do go wrong and you want to go back and change it. But it's not as unforgiving, I think, as maybe it's been made out to be by saying there's only one save file, because there is, but and it's certainly more unforgiving than most RPGs, but there are, it doesn't feel like it's punishing you. It feels like it's giving you options. And there are consequences to messing up, but it's like, if I mess up in a quest, I know I can always go back to the inn and then try maybe a new build or a new approach or whatever.
How was general menu navigation, map navigation, like waymarker navigation? Like that stuff was a bit awkward in the original. You could put things down on the map. They had the whole fog of war thing, so you were only like fleshing out the map as you went. But at the time, they didn't have the what Skyrim sort of pioneered or whatever, where you have like the thing at the top on the hood where it's I'm going to rotate my character and see what lines up. It was all just icons on a mini map, but only if you'd actually put markers down by pausing and putting them on there.
Interesting.
Then you would know where to go on your mini map. Like it's been 12 years, but still.
Again, I didn't play it like you did, but it seems a little bit more forgiving than that without losing the intent behind those design choices. When you're uncovering the Fog of War map, which works the same thing, you don't see what's there until you're actually in it, you will uncover markers that just stay on the map. Like if you find a cave entrance, that will be there forever. If you find a town, that'll be there forever, and you can click in, go to a more detailed view. But you are encouraged to drop your own custom markers down on the map if you see something interesting, because not everything is going to be signposted. And I really like the way it approaches its quest markers just generally. Like you will get a quest marker sometimes that pops up on the map if you have to go find a specific person. It'll say they're in this general vicinity. But what I like about it is, like, again, I keep going back to this dragon because I think it really sums up like what this game does best in my early experience with it. Like that is, you literally just get the quest objective of repel the dragon. How you do that is
so
up
nebulous
to you. Absolutely. Like you can fight it, it'll give you the area where the dragon is, but it won't say like optional, you can do this, optional, you can do this, optional, talk to this guy. And that's just the same with some of the quests. It might be like infiltrate a dungeon, infiltrate a prison. Figure it out. That's where the prison is. You figure out how to get in without being booted or restricted and stuff.
That's like the exact opposite of how Rockstar would do it. Where it's like, you're going to stand exactly here in this sphere, and if you go outside of it, you've failed it, and do it again.
Absolutely, and that again took me a little while to get used to, because I kept thinking, am I doing this right? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? But there are so many different options and so many different ways to tackle a quest that I quite like that. It just gives me an area of where the thing is, and it's kind of up to you to talk to people to get more information. Look look around the houses like I mentioned and get some hints. Or you can even go see an oracle, which gives you a vague hint about what you should do next in the quest.
Okay.
And the pawn system comes into play because the pawns you're getting are from other players' playthroughs.
Yeah.
So if they've done that quest and you have a pawn who has done that quest before, they might say, "Hey, master, I got a few tips for you.
That's great.
I know where to go next, so you're not just fumbling around." And then you have the option to either follow that advice and let them lead, or you can just be like, if you want to do it all yourself, just go, "No, I'm okay.
Right,
I'm going to figure it
cool.
out myself." So that element, man. What a cool game. I could talk about this for like an hour and I only played 20 hours.
We'll do plenty more. Subscribe to the What Culture Gaming podcast because we'll be talking about it next week. That whole pawn system was always really cool back in the day. The idea that you can just tap into this pool of other NPCs that other players have made and then bring them on your quests and spec them out and customize them, etc. on your side as well. And obviously they have different loadouts. You can kind of approach it where you might have a sword, they might have a bow and arrow, etc. Have they fleshed out the options for filtering them and things like that? Because it was like most upvoted pawns of the month or something.
Right,
Back in the original, stuff like that.
This is the part of the game that really confused me the most, man, because like the game gives you no context for who you are or what the world is really outside of a couple lines.
Yeah, we should super quickly say that I think like the original, the story is just a dragon stole your heart.
Yes, but even that, you don't know that for a few hours.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that's like very early in the game, but initially it's like, you're the Arisen, you control the pawns, and as someone who hadn't played the original game, I was like,
Right.
Who? What? Like, huh?
Where am I rising from?
And it was a bit difficult to kind of wrap my head around the pawn system, because I didn't know if they were going to be like regular comparisons I was taking with me for like a good few hours and then swapping out, or if I was supposed to be swapping them out all the time, because only your main pawn that you create that shows up in other people's world, they're the only ones that can level up along with you.
Yes.
Every other pawn that you get will stay at that level, and then you're supposed to kind of swap them out. But I was kind of confused because suddenly you get these pawns, and when they're in your world, they're like immediately devoted to you. They're like, "Okay, master, like you're in charge of everything. We love you so much. Like we're your companion."
Three little golems coming after you.
And I was kind of like, I don't even know who I am. Like, I wouldn't be this indebted to me, and I'm me.
Yeah.
So it was really tough to kind of reconcile that. But the more I've played, the more I kind of understand that system, and swapping them out has been a lot of fun. Yes, when you do find the rifts, which they're called, and you can choose a new pawn, you can filter it by if they know information about this specific mission, the class they have, the level they are, like the information about them is quite extensive, so you can always kind of cater to what you need in the moment. And it was something that I initially didn't like, especially because, and it's another negative, the dialogue repeats so much.
Yeah.
I've heard my pawns tell me that their master also mostly chose women companions, and I'm like, you told me this in hour 1, it's hour 20, do we have to keep saying this every 5 minutes?
They're sort of like weird brain dead robots. So like they've only even got like 5 lines they're going to keep giving you anyway.
They kind of are, and that does get annoying the more you play. But the more I've kind of come to understand them, and the more I am swapping them out, meeting new people. It's a really interesting system, especially because every time you rest, whether it's in an inn or if you can get a house, you'll wake up and your pawn might have been in someone else's game.
Yes.
So then they give you essentially like a written report of what they've been up to, and the things that they've learned and the wares they might be bringing back, and that is so cool because then your pawn now has information about maybe a certain quest that they can help you with if you want it. And there's a lot to this game, man.
The pawn system was a really cool idea back in 2012, and at the time, as like Dark Souls was blowing up, like the original, obviously 2011, people were getting used to that. It kind of felt like a wrinkle of the summon system and leaving messages for each other, and it was. But the whole thing was just overshadowed by Skyrim back in the day. Dragon's Dogma was always this really cool cult classic. But I wonder, this gives it like a wider feel where it's like it's a Strand game, as Hideo Kojima once said.
Yeah.
And it's like the pawn system is the original Strand system, or the original shared progression, all getting through it at the same time thing that Kojima reckoned Death Stranding did, but it's been in Souls, it's been in Dogma for over 10 years.
You know how you got like likes on your structures in Death Stranding? I always felt good about that. I always felt like I was helping someone out. And I get the same thrill when my pawn returns and she's got a thumbs up and they're like, I know you helped this guy out. I know you helped them on their journey, and you know what? I'm pleased you're back. Now come and help me. It's got a lot of systems like that where it's kind of encourages you, to have that distanced relationship with other players, and I think that's really interesting to see in stuff like Souls, in stuff like Death Stranding. I guess my final thought on my experience thus far, we've mentioned a lot From Software stuff, we've mentioned a bunch of other RPGs like Skyrim. To me, not in terms of the game feel or the content or the themes or anything like that, but this reminds me most of Nier Automata. And what I mean by that is Nier Automata was this breakthrough hit for that franchise, but it didn't necessarily do all that much new. Of course, there was new stuff in there, but that game's biggest, like, memorable moments and tricks that it had up its sleeve, a lot of those were in the original Nier.
Yeah, that's true.
Because that game was less refined and less polished, not many people kind of experienced it. And that's the feeling I get with Dragon's Dogma 2. Like, a lot of the elements, if not all of them, are brought over from the original, but they're more refined, they're more robust, and they're more appealing, I think, to a mainstream audience.
Yeah,
so it's kind of doing the trick again, but with way more focus and hopefully with way more kind of broad appeal to bring people like me in who is now going, well, this rules, I want to go play the original right now.
Yeah, I feel like the thing I said at the beginning, like, I feel like the ground has shifted under their feet in a way that's meant they've actually risen above. Like, the Bethesda on the side, you've kind of got From Software in between releases at the minute. Like, this is the perfect time for this to drop. 2024 is also dominated by RPGs across the board, whether it's Final Fantasy or Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, or Persona 3's remake or whatever. And this just seems so confident. And it's like Capcom continue to be on the form of their lives. Like, they had the whole thing back in 2018 of their new CEO, or the CEO at the time, saying Capcom is back. And they've just kind of ridden that out. Like, the Resident Evil remakes, Monster Hunter is absolutely flying. The Switch, like the Monster Hunter Rise on Switch, was awesome. I feel like this is extremely confident. And I raised an eyebrow when they did the Netflix Dragon's Dogma adaptation. As somebody who loves Dragon's Dogma, I was like, that's a weird pick, but cool. It also gives me hope for a new Onimusha, because they have an Onimusha Netflix show as well. But it feels like they're making a play for Dragon's Dogma to be a way bigger deal than it ever used to be, and go from cult classic to genuinely recommendable overall RPG, and they've seemed like they've nailed it.
Absolutely, man.